Effective immediately, Falcon Systems will not be issuing your final payment. This project has failed to meet expectations. Victor Hale, the CFO, dropped the words across the glass conference room like a hammer blow. I sat frozen, my contract binder still open in front of me. He added almost casually, "Consider it a professional lesson. Ethan, reputation is worth more than code." Laughter rippled faintly at the edges of the room. "My name is Ethan Cole, 50 years old, an independent systems consultant. For 6 months I had lived and breathed Falcon's ERP upgrade. The system had gone live just 1 week earlier, with no critical errors, downtime already reduced by 12%. Yet here I was, branded a failure in front of the entire board. I reached into my briefcase and touched the small silver USB drive I always carried. On it were the logs, the audit trails, the fingerprints that would eventually bury Victor, but not today. Not yet, let him believe he'd buried me. He had no idea he'd just handed me the weapon that would bury him instead. I didn't say a word as the meeting dissolved into the kind of hallway chatter that follows public executions. People were suddenly fascinated by the ceiling, the floor, an invisible message on their phones. I closed the binder, slid it into my briefcase, and stepped out into the corridor. The glass walls along the west side of Falcon's headquarters reflected a city that went on building itself whether I was paid or not. Traffic hissed 30 floors down. The skyline glittered like a lie. I rode the elevator alone. When the doors opened on the lobby, I caught my reflection in the steel. A man with steel gray hair and a face that had learned how to take a punch. Not the first. Possibly not the last. That fact no longer frightened me. At the revolving doors, a security guard I knew, Damon, lifted his chin. "Tough meeting?" he said, then flinched as if he'd crossed a line. "Could have gone better," I said. He nodded at my badge. "Still works?" "For now," I smiled. I meant it to be reassuring. It felt like a promise. Outside, the air had that brittle, clean edge you get after rain. I stood still a long minute, watching buses breathe and people flow, before heading to the cafe across the street. I bought a coffee I didn't want and sat with it cooling in my hands, replaying the last hour frame by frame. Professional lesson. Ethan. Victor had said my name the way a man says a dog's. I'm old enough to know anger is an expensive hobby. I counted the costs. Then I counted the numbers. Downtime, down 12% in week 1. Throughput, up 18. Critical failures, 0. Test coverage, 96% across core modules. The system had done what it was built to do. What I had promised it would do. And what the board had paid me to make it do, until a man who loved shortcuts more than accuracy decided to turn truth into a rounding error. The line between malice and incompetence is thin. It's usually written in pencil. But sometimes people help you ink it. 3 weeks earlier, Victor had stopped me after the weekly status review. We stood in the same glass room where he'd ambushed me, but that day the only witnesses were a dying ficus and the city. "We need acceleration," he'd said. "I'm looking at cycle times, and frankly, Ethan, the board expects more. Disable the cross-ledger validation for the go-live window. Temporarily. We'll switch it back once we're stable." "No," I'd said. "There are 2 kinds of no. The kind a person thinks they can negotiate past, and the kind that plants a fence post." I drove the post deep. "Not on my name." He had smiled a thin smile. "Noted." When a man like Victor says noted, he means, I will remember this at a time that hurts you. I drained the coffee, tossed the cup, and walked back. The badge reader blinked green. Damon let me through with a low, "Good luck." Sophie, the project manager, found me before I reached my office. She had the quick, practical stride of someone who'd kept programs alive by sheer coordination. Her brown hair was pulled back. Her eyes were wide and careful. "I'm sorry," she said. "You warned me," I said. "It's not on you." She handed me her phone. On the screen was a PDF of a report, time-stamped that morning. Go live success. Thanks to Ethan, downtime reduced 12% in week 1. System fully operational. Victor asked me to send him a balanced summary last night, she said. I sent the truth. Forwarded it to you this morning when I saw the calendar invite for the board. I thought, she stopped, squeezed the phone. I thought it might matter. It will, I said. Just not the way he expects, she exhaled, tension leaving in a rush. Be careful. He's been meeting with Orion Consulting. Off the books. I only know because the assistant booked personal finance on his calendar, but the conference room was the Orion Suite, floor 31. I nodded. Thank you. People think revenge is a hot thing. It isn't, not the kind that works. The kind that works is cold and accurate and arrives with receipts. That night, I waited until the cleaning crews finished. The building was mostly dark except for the 20th floor, where the network operations team ran a permanent midnight. I passed them with a nod. They were used to my hours. The badge light on the server room flashed green again because security procedures are strong until a trusted face shows up at a trusted door. The racks wound away into the dark, rows of black ribs humming softly. Lights blinked weakly like a city seen from an airplane. My fingers moved because they had done this 1,000 times. I mounted the audit volumes, filtered by date, and let the command line return what it always does when the truth is hiding in plain sight. Lines and lines and lines that no one thinks will ever be read by anyone with a reason to care. Export events, timestamps, user credentials, destination IPs. There are moments when the world goes from fog to map. I hit one user, vhail, action, export, modules, custom ledger bridge, inventory optimizer, route to scheduler. Timestamp, 2 days ago, 2317. Destination, a block of numbers that wasn't ours. I traced the destination. The reverse lookup returned an innocuous hosting provider. The customer record behind it, once I followed the breadcrumbs through a public invoice cache, was Orion Consulting. He hadn't even hired a decent thief. The contract share on the corporate drive required CFO clearance, which a good sysadmin could have denied me. But a good sysadmin hadn't been hired because people like Victor don't fund the line items that keep honest people honest. Years ago, I'd learned that the most important skill in my trade is not coding or architecture. It's knowing where the bodies get buried when profit is prioritized over prudence. The folder was called Licensing. The document title was Third-Party Licensing Agreement, Orion, the signature. Block was Victor Hale. The language was bland in that way legal theft always is. Non-unique methodologies. Proprietary enhancements. Perpetual right to deploy modules derived from internal development. The kind of phrases that could make a prosecutor yawn until you set them next to the logs. I sat very still. The cooling fans gave the air a steady, artificial heartbeat. I touched the USB in my pocket because I wanted the anchor of metal. The drive had a small scratch on its back from a day in Denver when I dropped it against a curb while a client yelled about a budget variance that was, in fact, his own fault. It was a reminder that mistakes happen. But not tonight. I pulled the evidence. Export logs? Change histories. Code hashes. A full inventory of my modules with checksums. Screenshots of the licensing agreement with timestamps. Access trails showing credentials used from Victor's office IP after hours. When the transfer finished, I sat for a while longer. I was thinking about reputation. Not the speech Victor had made about it, some fortune cookie half-wisdom thrown at a man he expected to fold, but the thing itself. I'd spent 25 years in the kind of rooms where you are either the person who makes sure the thing works or the person who explains why it didn't. My reputation was that when I said I'd deliver, the thing delivered. I had no interest in being famous, but I had a fierce interest in being unarguable. At 9, I was in Michael Grant's office. Michael and I had written our first joint deployment plan on a whiteboard with dying markers in a company that no longer existed. He'd left to practice law when he realized he could prevent more disasters with contracts than with code. He read without talking. Lawyers who speak before they read are the kind who lose, and Michael liked winning. When he finished, he tapped the printouts with 2 fingers. "You've got him," he said. "Clean, this is IP theft and fraud." He used his position to misappropriate your work and attempted to monetize it through an unapproved licensing vehicle. "This is going to get ugly once I pull on the first thread." "I don't want ugly," I said. "I want public," he leaned back. "Even better. If you want to hurt him most, let him double down one more time. Then show the board all of this in one shot. No pre-reads. No time to coordinate a story. And Falcon? They'll do whatever their largest client wants," he said, and raised a hand before I could object. Which brings me to your leverage. Pinnacle's satisfaction matters. If they're happy, Falcon will follow. If they're furious, Falcon will panic. "Where are they now?" "Happy," I said. "They called me." I pulled out my phone and played the voicemail from the Pinnacle rep. Michael's expression didn't change while it played, but his right hand had already reached for a yellow pad. He wrote a list, short, crisp, then tore it off and slid it across to me. "Keep your badge active," he said. "Don't tip security to anything yet. Do not contact Victor. Document everything. I'll contact Pinnacle's council to make sure their leadership knows what's coming, without disclosing more than we need to. We want them at the meeting." He paused. "Ethically, are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," I said. "I'm calm." "Good," he said. Calm wins courtrooms and boardrooms. That night I told my son Luke he came over at 7 with takeout and the same lopsided grin he'd had at 10 when he'd dismantled our router to see how the blinking lights worked. He's 27 now and works in cybersecurity, which means he has a professional appreciation for the human tendency to cut corners and then lie about it. "Dad," he said after I finished, "you built your whole career on integrity. Don't let him bury that. If you stay quiet, it's not just money you lose. It's your legacy." I smiled because the word sounded dramatic and true at the same time. "Legacy," I said. "That and the mortgage." He laughed. "Michael will claw that back with interest. But the bigger win is what you do next. Don't just defend your name. Set the rules so this doesn't happen again." "Already thinking about it," I said. "Audit at the core. Independent logging. Two-factor exports. Immutable trail off-site archiving." He pointed his chopsticks at me. "Name it something boring enough the board feels safe, and specific enough the industry knows what it is." "The coal audit system," I said deadpan. He rolled his eyes. "Subtle." "Simple," I said, and we both grinned. When he left, I arranged the evidence like a story. Chronology is a weapon. People can argue opinions. They cannot argue time. I built a timeline that a tired board could follow, even if the coffee had gone cold. I printed the keylogs big enough that the back row could read the usernames without squinting. I recorded a short clip of the export event, cursor following the line item to the IP that wasn't ours. I rehearsed silence. Silence is where other people hang themselves. Thursday arrived with a sky so clear, it made the city look like a rendering. Victor called a strategic realignment meeting at 9. 2 reps from Pinnacle were on the invite. Carla Santos, a woman who could slice a bad argument into confetti with a single question, and a junior operations lead whose name I didn't know yet. The board filtered in with coffee and the loose managerial bonhomie of people who only feel relief when someone else is on the agenda. Victor worked the room like a politician. He shook hands as if he were already accepting apologies. When he began, the slides were precise lies. Downtime spikes exaggerated, complaint tickets inflated, a cost overrun chart that included 3 projects that weren't mine, pasted in a way that made everything look like my mess. He had probably stayed up late to get the font sizes perfect. "Falcon cannot afford to be chained to a contractor's flawed work," he concluded. "Effective immediately, we will transition to a new vendor, Orion Consulting." Orion's logo floated on the screen with the unearned confidence of a brand that has paid for nicer typefaces than results. "That doesn't match our experience," Carla said. Her voice was level and carried to the back row. She didn't bother to pretend confusion. "Our staff reported downtime reduced since go live." Victor's smile hardened a notch. "Early anomalies, perhaps. Long-term metrics are clear." "Then let's be clear," I said, and stood. The laptop opened with a pleasant click. The projector accepted the input like it had been waiting. I didn't ask permission. People who are in the right don't ask permission to show the receipts. The first slide was nothing more than numbers. Downtime reduced 12%, throughput up 18, critical failures at 0, support ticket resolution time improved by 14% week over week. I let the room read. I didn't narrate. Narration invites rebuttal. Facts invite silence. The second was the audit log. User vhail, action, export. Modules, custom ledger bridge, inventory, optimizer, route scheduler. Destination, not us. I clicked play on the short recorded clip that showed the cursor following the export line to the IP, then to the hosting provider, then to the Orion billing record. The reaction was the same in every face. A moment of rejection, a flicker of acceptance, then anger at having been positioned to be complicit. The human brain hates cognitive dissonance. It resolves it by picking a side. I gave them a clean side to pick. Carla turned to Victor. "Mr. Hale, are you prepared to explain this?" He had options. He took the worst one. Routine backups. "Backups don't route to Orion's servers," I said. No heat, no theater. Just the one sentence I had practiced not to overplay. The CEO, a woman who had run 3 turnarounds by saying little and listening hard, watched Victor. Her jaw set. "Victor, sit down," he obeyed. It was, as Michael would later say, the first wise choice he'd made all month. I didn't press. I shifted the room forward. "This is not just about paying me," I said. "This is about Falcon's exposure. It happened because one person could do it, and no system would stop him. You can fire him, and you will still have the same hole in your process. I propose you close the hole." I pulled up the prototype. I had built it like I build everything I care about. Simple enough to explain to a board, solid enough to satisfy the auditor who hates me most. "The Cole audit system," I said, and got the half smile from Carla that told me the name would play fine once the savings did. Every change logged, tamper evident. Every export dual authorized, no exceptions. Every log archived offsite and read only to everyone, including the CFO. Quarterly independent review by a third party you select. Alerts routed to an audit inbox that cannot be filtered or deleted by any executive. The COO frowned. "Cost? So is losing trust," I said. "So is litigation. So is losing clients like Pinnacle." I didn't look at Carla when I said it. I didn't have to. The room already felt the weight of her attention. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael, all evidence admissible. "You're protected. Proceed." The CEO leaned back. That's a moment you can feel across a room. The instant when the decision has been made and everyone else is just waiting to find out what it is. "Draft the proposal," she said. "You'll have our review next week." Victor stared at the table. His cufflinks, which had looked like little suns earlier, were dull in the fluorescent light. For a second, I almost felt sorry. Then I remembered the boardroom laugh. Over the weekend, Michael did what men like Michael do. He set up the chessboard. Notices were drafted. Discovery lists were prepared. He spoke to Falcon's counsel, who had once been his opposing counsel on a case that ended with a handshake and a drink. He spoke to Pinnacle's counsel, who said very little and asked for everything. He told me when to speak and when to sit on my hands. Monday's meeting included auditors. They arrived with polite expressions and hard eyes, carrying those narrow folders that turn into evidence binders if you lie. Victor went first. "Yes, mistakes were made," he began, voice slick but thin. "But I acted in Falcon's best interests. Transfers under my name were contingency backups." The lead auditor opened her folder. "Contingencies routed to Orion servers? With a $200,000 payment authorized by you?" She looked at the CEO. "We obtained an authorization record from accounts payable." Victor's smile cracked. "That was miscommunication." I stood and presented the timeline. Final system test, success. Export events after. Orion contract within 24 hours. A row of dominoes no one could pretend were windblown. Carla leaned in. "So you declared the system a failure while simultaneously selling it?" "I was safeguarding Falcon," Victor said. He'd abandoned reason and entered rhetoric. It was not a terrain that would save him. The CFO, the real one, not Victor's title, slammed the table with the flat of his palm. "By stealing from a contractor? By risking a multi-million-dollar client?" Phones buzzed. The CEO lifted hers and read. Her face did not change except at the edges where impressions live. "From the Pinnacle Logistics Board," she said aloud. "Our continued partnership is contingent on Falcon adopting the Cole audit system with Ethan Cole as lead consultant." She looked at Victor. In another life, the look would have been a blessing. In this life, it was a verdict. "Victor Hale, you are terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Legal action will follow for intellectual property theft." 2 guards stepped forward. Victor's chair screeched back. "You can't do this," he said. "I am Falcon." "Falcon is built on trust," the CEO said. "And trust is something you destroyed." They walked him out through the same glass doors he had walked me through with a smile a week earlier. The world remains fond of symmetry. After the board turned to me. "Ethan," the CEO said, "the board has voted unanimously. Lead the implementation. Your compensation will be renegotiated to reflect your contribution." I nodded once because I had learned a long time ago that victory doesn't need a speech. It needs follow-through. I didn't go home immediately. I went to the 20th floor, to the server room that had been a church when I most needed a god. I stood between the racks and listened to the hum. I thought about the 25 years that had brought me here. The night I slept under my desk in Cincinnati while an inventory reconciliation ate itself alive. The spring I missed my anniversary because a payroll patch went sideways on a Friday. The December blizzard in which I carried tapes across a parking lot because the courier got stuck on I-70. The city does not care about your heroics. But systems remember. They repay you by doing what you ask when you ask them to do it. If you're lucky, people notice. If you're not, logs do. A week later, I sat in my home office turning the silver USB in my fingers. It looked small. It had always been small. But in my hand, it felt like something else. Not power, not revenge, but proof. The difference between a story and a case is evidence. On the wall, I'd pinned a whiteboard sketch of the coal audit system. In the days since the board vote, I'd turned it into a plan with dates and dependencies and boring deliverables that would make accountants happy. A good system is a boring one. It makes excitement unnecessary. Luke knocked twice and let himself in. He picked up the USB, rolled it on his palm, and set it down again the way you do when you understand how a thing works and therefore no longer fear it. That little thing changed everything, he said. It didn't change anything, I said. It just revealed the truth. We stepped onto the balcony. The city was all cranes and lit windows and the slow breathing of a place that believes tomorrow is something it can build. For the first time in months, I felt no bitterness. The sensation was startling, not for its sweetness, but for its quiet. I had been carrying a weight I didn't know until it was gone. Revenge is an ugly word. What I wanted was closer to justice and closer still to peace. Victor's fall was not my victory. My victory was the knowledge that the work had outlasted the noise. That a good system, built clean, would survive the man who tried to steal it. That if you take notes and you tell the truth, eventually the truth tells your story for you. I walked back to my desk and slid the USB into its shallow groove beside the keyboard. It was no longer a talisman. It was a reminder. The file structure matters. The log levels matter. The backups matter. The boring things you do when no one is looking matter most, because they are the only things that stand when someone decides to knock your name off a contract and sell your work under theirs. Michael called the next morning. Settlement, he said. You'll like the number. More importantly, you'll like the admissions. I don't need the apology. I said it because it was true. I know, he said, but it reads well in a frame. Save it for a rainy day, he paused. Pinnacle's GC asked if you'd be willing to speak at their summit in the fall. Building trust by design. 10 minutes on audit as culture. No vendor pitch. Just the philosophy. Tell them yes, I said, and thought of the whiteboard on my wall. And tell them I'll bring the boring slides. The kind that save millions. After we hung up, I opened a new document and wrote the first line. Trust is not a value. It is a system. Under it, I listed the rules we had designed. The ones Falcon had adopted, the ones any company could adopt if they wanted to make theft difficult and truth easy. I didn't plan to build a brand. I planned to build a standard. The distinction was important to me, and that was enough. I drove to Falcon that afternoon to finalize the work plan. As I crossed the lobby, Damon looked up. Different day, he said. Different day, I agreed. He raised his hand in a sort of salute. It embarrassed us both. I let it stand. The CEO met me in the glass room. The ficus was gone. Someone had read my mind and taken it out. We shook hands the way you do when both people have survived something and have work to do. I read your proposal, she said. I especially like the part where you make executives ask permission from each other. I assume that was the point? Trust is not a solo sport, I said. It's checks and balances. If I can't export alone and you can't either, the company can. Good, she said. We'll build a culture around that sentence. We spent 2 hours going through dates. I insisted on training sessions that would be measured by quiz scores and surprise audits. I insisted on whistleblower protections for anyone who saw export anomalies. I insisted on a tiny budget line for pizza on Friday nights for the operations team because morale is not a soft thing when the lights must stay on. When I left, the skyline looked the same. It always does. The work is not to change the skyline. The work is to change the way a building breathes inside. At home, I cleaned my desk the way I do after a project moves from storm to maintenance. Papers filed, notes scanned, USB in its slot. The evening settled on the neighborhood soft and ordinary. Luke came by with ice cream. We ate it out of the paper carton like we did when his mother left, and we had to learn how to fill a quiet house with something other than hurt. He told me about a bug bounty he'd won. I told him about the pizza budget. We argued about baseball like it mattered. It did. Before he left, he paused with his hand on the door. You know, he said, you didn't ruin Victor. No, I said. He did that. You just held up a mirror. Logs, I said. The most honest mirrors we have, he grinned. You're going to be insufferable at that summit. Only for 10 minutes, I said. They'll survive. When he was gone, I sat a while with nothing on. No TV, no music, just the house doing its evening ticks. I thought about all the people I had met across 25 years of emergencies. The good ones who stayed late without being asked. The ones who taught themselves the feature that mattered. The ones who refused to ship when the test failed. The ones who told the truth and paid for it. We are not the loudest class of professionals, but we build the scaffolding under things that louder people stand on when they make speeches. Losing a check stung. Losing my name would have burned. I hadn't lost it. I had gotten to keep it because the world, for all its appetite for shortcuts, still bends toward people who keep receipts. If you've ever had someone try to steal your effort, consider this a reminder. Truth always surfaces. Sometimes the smallest evidence rewrites the biggest lie. Sometimes the weapon they hand you is the one with which they bury themselves. Not because you swung it. Because you put it in the light and let it speak. The city went on outside. Somewhere a bus hissed. Somewhere a window closed. That night I slept with the window cracked and the house cooler than I liked. It made the blankets feel like something earned. In the morning I woke before the alarm because men my age do. I made coffee and opened the laptop. The cursor blinked in the new document. I wrote the second line beneath the first. Integrity is just consistency over time. Then I opened a calendar invite from the CEO. It was for a town hall the following week. Transparency, our new standard. She'd asked if I would speak for 5 minutes. I accepted, then cut my remarks to 3. 5 minutes erodes into platitudes. 3 forces a point. That afternoon, Sophie stopped by my new temporary office, 2 doors down from the glass room. She leaned against the doorframe and said, "You were right." The numbers spoke, eventually. "Only because you printed them," I said. "Only because you forwarded them to me," she shrugged. "Only because you did the work." We didn't try to untangle the sequence. We just stood in the relief of a system that, if not fair, had been exposed to daylight long enough to behave. When she left, I typed 2 more sentences into the document that would be the talk I didn't plan to give more than once and suspected I would end up giving a dozen times. Revenge hadn't been about ruining a man. That's cheap. Real revenge is thriving so visibly that the lie never had a chance to live. I saved the file. I named it something boring. And then I got back to work. And if you believe integrity belongs in every office, subscribe to Revenge at the Office. Because there are more reckonings ahead, ones you won't want to miss.